My name is Illy Carter, and I am 17 years old, born and raised in Ohio, and the night everything changed started as a celebration that was supposed to be perfect. My grandfather, Judge Raymond Carter, had served in the county high court longer than anyone could remember, and tonight was his retirement dinner. People from all over town came, lawyers, clerks, former defendants, reporters, and family, and everyone kept saying how proud they were. I stood near the edge of the restaurant, holding my soda, feeling out of place in my borrowed suit, watching adults laugh about cases I did not understand. Grandpa Ray looked calm and tall, like he always did, the same man who taught me how to tie a knot, how to read people by their eyes, and how silence could be louder than shouting. He raised me after my parents died in a highway crash when I was 9, and to me, he was not a judge, he was my whole world. My cousin Marcus, his nephew, stood close to him, smiling, shaking hands, acting like the perfect family man. Marcus was successful, sharp, dressed, always talking about business and money and investments, and how he deserved more from life. Grandpa trusted him completely. I did not. I had seen Marcus arguing on the phone late at night, whispering angrily about debts and deadlines. I had seen him going through grandpa paperwork, pretending it was harmless. I had even heard him ask once what would happen to everything if grandpa's health suddenly declined. That night, the restaurant was warm, candles glowing against dark wood walls and crystal glasses everywhere. I sat 2 tables away when I saw Marcus lean in toward grandpa's wine glass. He glanced around quickly and dropped something white and tiny into the red wine. My heart started pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed, but everyone was laughing, clapping, distracted by speeches. Grandpa did not see it. He was smiling, listening to someone praise his career. I wanted to scream, but my legs would not move. Marcus stepped back, calm, confident, and raised his own glass. Then something happened that felt unreal. Grandpa reached down as if he dropped his fork, and when he came back up, the glasses had switched places. I did not know how he did it, but I knew exactly why. The toast began. Marcus stood up, praising integrity, justice, family, loyalty, his voice smooth and convincing. I watched Grandpa's face and saw something different there, not anger, not fear, but focus. They raised their glasses. Marcus drank deeply. Grandpa only sipped. Minutes passed. At first, nothing happened. Then Marcus started sweating, rubbing his hands, his smile slipping. He excused himself and stumbled toward the restroom. Whispers spread. People turned when Marcus came back. His face was pale. His words slurred, and panic filled his eyes. Someone called for help. Grandpa stayed seated, calm, steady, like he was in court again. When the truth came out, Marcus broke down, crying, admitting he had tried to cause a medical scare to force Grandpa into changing his will. Police arrived, ambulance lights flashed outside. I stood frozen, watching the man I once admired destroy himself in front of everyone. Later, at the hospital, Grandpa put a hand on my shoulder and said something I will never forget. Justice always listens, even when you think no one is watching. But what I learned next about Marcus' past plans and how close I came to losing the only family I had will stay with me forever. And that is what I am about to tell you next. The next morning, I woke up on a stiff hospital chair with my neck aching and my mind racing. The smell of disinfectant filled the air and machines beeped softly around my grandfather's bed. Judge Raymond Carter lay still but awake, his eyes open, sharp and calm like always. He looked at me and smiled slightly and told me to sit closer. I asked him how he knew what Marcus planned, and he took a long breath. Before speaking, he said years on the bench had trained him to notice patterns not just in criminals, but in family too. Marcus' behavior had changed months ago. Impatience, anger, greed, all leaking through small cracks. Grandpa said he had quietly moved his documents, reviewed his will, and prepared himself for the worst. He never thought Marcus would go that far, but he was ready just in case I felt sick. Realizing how close I came to losing him, police officers returned later that day, asking questions and taking statements. They told us Marcus had crushing debt, failed investments, and people pressuring him. What shocked me most was learning he had researched substances that could cause confusion without immediate death. He planned to scare Grandpa into appearing unfit so control would pass to him. But plans like that always leave a trail. Security cameras, witnesses, and Marcus' own panic unraveled everything. Word spread fast through town. The respected family image cracked overnight at school. Kids whispered. Teachers looked at me with pity and curiosity. I wanted to disappear. Grandpa insisted we return home instead of hiding. He said truth loses power when you run from it. That night we sat at the kitchen table, just the two of us eating soup in silence. Then he told me something that changed how I see everything. He said justice is not about punishment. It is about balance. Marcus would face consequences, but hatred would only poison me too. He told me to learn from this, not harden from it. Days passed. Court dates were set. Reporters camped outside. Letters arrived, some supportive, some cruel. Grandpa read every one and never complained. He spent mornings walking slowly, afternoons teaching me chess, and evenings telling stories from his childhood. I realized he was preparing me for something more than grief. One afternoon, he handed me a folder. Inside were letters he had written years ago, meant for different moments in life. One was addressed to me. It talked about responsibility, integrity, and choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. I asked why he wrote them so early. He said life does not warn you before testing you. Marcus' trial approached, and I was called to speak as a witness. Standing in that courtroom felt heavier than anything I had known. Marcus avoided my eyes. When I spoke, my voice shook. But I told the truth, not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity. The judge listened carefully. The jury watched silently. When it was over, I stepped outside and felt like I could finally breathe. But the story did not end there, because weeks later, Grandpa made a decision that stunned everyone, including me, a decision that would change my future and reveal the final lesson he wanted me to learn, and that is what I will tell you next. Continue. The courtroom was quiet. The day my grandfather made his announcement, not the heavy, tense quiet of a trial, but the uncertain silence that comes before a truth lands. Marcus' sentencing was over, and the damage had already been done. He stood thinner, broken, looking nothing like the confident man from the dinner. When we returned home, reporters followed, but Grandpa ignored them completely. That evening, he asked me to sit with him in his study, the room filled with old law books and framed photos. He opened the desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. Inside was a revised will. I thought he was going to explain how he protected everything from Marcus. Instead, he told me he had removed almost all inheritance clauses entirely. I stared at him, confused and angry, asking why, after everything that happened. He told me wealth should never be a reward for blood alone. He said giving money without values creates hunger, not security. He had decided most of his assets would go into a community trust for education, legal aid, and youth mentorship. My chest tightened because I thought that meant nothing would be left for us. Then he smiled and said he left me something far more dangerous than money: responsibility. He explained the trust would be managed by a board, but I would have a seat when I turned 18. not because I was family, but because I had witnessed truth and chosen not to look away. I did not feel ready. I felt scared. He told me fear means you understand. Wait, that night I could not sleep. My phone buzzed non-stop messages from classmates, some impressed, some mocking. People assumed I was rich, assumed I would benefit. Somehow they did not understand that legacy is heavier than cash. A week later, Grandpa health declined unexpectedly. Nothing dramatic, just age catching up quietly. I spent every afternoon by his side listening. He talked about cases he regretted, people he wished he had helped differently. He told me justice is not perfect. It is human. One afternoon, he asked me to read aloud from a letter he wrote years ago. It said, "Power reveals who you are, not who you pretend to be." I asked him if he regretted trusting Marcus. He shook his head and said, "Trust is never wrong. Betrayal is the choice of the betrayer." Those words stayed with me. When Grandpa was discharged, we returned home, but things were different. The house felt quieter, heavier. Marcus' lawyers tried contacting us, offering apologies, explanations, even threats. Grandpa refused all communication. He said forgiveness does not require access. The trust announcement went public. The town reacted strongly. Some praised him, others called him cruel. Marcus' family accused Grandpa of destroying bloodlines. I watched all of it unfold, realizing adulthood does not start with age. It starts with seeing clearly. One evening, Grandpa surprised me by asking me to speak at a local youth center. I refused at first, but he insisted. Standing in front of kids my age, I told them what I saw that night at the dinner, not the crime, but the warning signs, the whispers, the entitlement, the excuses. Afterward, a boy came up to me and said he saw those signs in his own family. I understood then what Grandpa was doing. He was turning pain into prevention. Weeks later, Marcus was transferred to a different facility. Before he left, he requested to see me. Against my instincts, Grandpa allowed it. Marcus looked at me through glass and said one sentence that chilled me. He said I should have finished the job. That was the moment I realized how close we came to losing everything. But what happened after that visit forced me to confront a choice that would define who I become. And that is what I will tell you next. Continue after the visit with Marcus. I did not sleep for days. His words replayed in my head over and over, heavy and dark. I kept wondering how someone could fall so far and still believe he was right. Grandpa noticed the change in me. Before I said anything one morning, he asked me to walk with him through the old neighborhood park. The trees were bare and the air cold, and every step felt slow. He told me something he had never said before. He said evil does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it whispers and waits for permission. He warned me that anger can become the same poison Marcus tried to use. I listened quietly, because deep down I felt it growing. That afternoon, Grandpa asked me to help organize old case files for donation boxes. Filled the living room stacked with decades of decisions. As we sorted through them, I saw stories of people who ruined their lives over moments of greed, fear, or pride. Grandpa said every case taught him that one choice can echo forever. Days later, a letter arrived from the trust board. They wanted me to attend meetings as an observer earlier than planned. I panicked. I was still just a kid dealing with school grief and pressure. But Grandpa insisted again. At the meeting, lawyers, professionals, and community leaders spoke in calm, confident voices. I barely spoke at all, but I listened. I heard how money could lift or destroy depending on direction. On the drive home, Grandpa asked what I learned. I told him power scares me. He smiled and said, "Good, it should. Power without fear becomes cruelty." Mean. While media attention faded, but the scars remained at school, a teacher asked me to speak in civics class about justice. I almost refused, but then I remembered the boy from the youth center. I spoke honestly about how law is not just rules, but restraint after class. A girl told me her father was in trouble, and she felt ashamed. I told her shame belongs to actions, not people. Those words surprised me as much. As they helped her that night, Grandpa's health dipped again, and he was admitted for observation. I sat beside his bed, holding his hand, feeling the weight of everything he had given me. He told me he was proud not because I stayed strong, but because I stayed kind. He said kindness is the hardest verdict to deliver. A week later, he returned home weaker but peaceful. He asked me to promise something. He asked me to promise I would not let this story turn me bitter. I promised, even though I did not know how winter passed slowly. The trust launched its first program, scholarships for kids who had parents in prison. I attended the ceremony, watching families cry with relief. I realized justice can heal when it reaches forward, not backward. One night, as Grandpa slept, I found a final letter addressed to be opened later. I wanted to wait, but he woke and told me to read it now. It said, "Legacy is not what you leave behind, but what you leave alive in others." I looked at him and understood he was preparing me for goodbye. But the choice he gave me next would test everything he taught me and force me to decide whether I would walk his path or run from it. And that is what I will tell you next. Continue. Morning, Grandpa asked me to make the choice. The sky was gray and low, like it was pressing down on the house. He sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a sweater, hands steady, eyes clear. He told me the trust board had offered me something unexpected. They wanted me to become the youth representative. Officially, not later, not someday, but now it meant meetings, responsibility, public speaking, and being visible in a town that already watched my every move. My first reaction was fear. I told him I wanted a normal life, college, games, weekends, without weight on my shoulders. He listened without interrupting, then nodded slowly. He said, "Normal is not peace when you are meant for purpose." That sentence scared me more than anything else. I asked him what would happen if I said no. He said nothing bad would happen, but something good might never start. I spent the rest of the day walking alone, thinking about Marcus, about the dinner, about the kids at the youth center. I thought about how close one selfish choice came to ending everything that night. I dreamed of the restaurant again, but this time I was the one holding the glass. I woke up shaking, knowing what I had to do the next morning. I told Grandpa I would accept. He did not smile. He just closed his eyes for a moment, like a burden had lifted. The announcement went public a week later. People reacted loudly, some support, if some angry, some accusing the trust of using me as a symbol. I learned quickly that visibility invites judgment. At my first meeting, I spoke for less than 2 minutes. I talked about prevention, not punishment, about teaching warning signs before damage happens. The room was silent. When I finished afterward, an older board member shook my hand and said he wished someone had spoken like that when he was young. Grandpa watched from the back of the room, his face calm, proud. Months passed, and routines formed: school mornings, meetings, afternoons, homework, late nights. I grew tired, but not empty. Then one evening, we received a call from the facility where Marcus was held. He had been involved in an incident, not violent, not dramatic, just another attempt to manipulate his way into control. Grandpa listened, then hung up, and said nothing later. He told me some people never stop reaching for power, even when it burns them. He asked if I wanted to visit Marcus again. I said no. He nodded and said choosing distance is also choosing wisdom. That night, Grandpa's health declined sharply. Doctors spoke quietly, monitors beeped steadily. I sat beside him, holding his hand just like before. He looked at me and said, "You already became who I hoped you would." I wanted to argue. You tell him I was not ready, not strong enough, but he squeezed my hand gently. He passed away before sunrise. The The town mourned publicly, but my grief was private, heavy, silent. At the funeral, people praised his career, his integrity, his legacy. I stood at the podium and spoke as his grandson, not his student. I said, he taught me justice begins long before a courtroom and lasts long after a verdict. When it was over, I felt empty but steady. Weeks later, life kept moving. The trust expanded, programs grew, and my voice carried further than I expected. Sometimes I still hear Marcus' words in my head, but they no longer scare me because I understand now that legacy is not inherited, it is chosen. And what happened next when I faced my own test without Grandpa beside me proved whether I truly learned that lesson. And that is what I will tell you next. Continue. The first real test came when Grandpa was no longer there to guide me. It arrived quietly through an email from the trust board. Late one night, a donor wanted to contribute a massive amount of money. But there was a condition. They wanted influence over which neighborhoods received funding, and which did not on paper. It sounded reasonable, strategic, even, but when I looked closer, I saw the pattern. Grandpa warned me about power, asking for permission to bend principles. I felt the old fear return, the same tight feeling I had the night of the dinner. I realized this was my glass. Now, I spent days thinking, reading Grandpa old letters, replaying his voice in my head. At the next board meeting, adults debated politely. Numbers, charts, projections filling the room. When it was my turn to speak, my hands shook. I told them the trust was not created to reward influence. I said helping some by ignoring others would turn generosity into control. The room went silent, just like before. For a moment, I thought I had ruined everything. Then the chairperson nodded slowly and said that was the reason Grandpa chose me. The offer was declined. News spread fast. Some people praised the decision, others criticized it, saying I was naive, wasting opportunity. I went home that night exhausted but calm. For the first time since Grandpa passed, I felt him close. Weeks later, I visited the youth center alone. A boy asked me why I kept doing this when it was so hard. I told him, because someone once believed I could carry weight without dropping myself. He smiled. Like that was enough. I still miss Grandpa every day. Sometimes I wish I could ask him what to do next, but I understand now that the lessons were never meant to end with him. They were meant to continue through choices. Marcus' sentence continues far away, and I do not follow the news anymore, not out of forgiveness, not out of hate, but because my path no longer runs through his shadow. I am still just a boy from America, trying to finish school, laugh with friends, and figure out the future. But I carry something older than me, something steady. The night of the dinner could have ended everything. Instead, it began something. And the next choice I face may be even harder than last, because now I know what is at stake, and that is why the rest of this story is still being written. This is where my story ends, not because the journey is finished, but because the lesson has been learned. Some people inherit money, some inherit pain. I inherited a choice to see clearly, to stay kind, to carry responsibility without letting it turn into poison. What happened that night could have destroyed my family and my future. Instead, it showed me who I could become. And that is why this story does not need another chapter.